You're not going to believe what happened the afternoon my daughter's boyfriend waited for me near the garden bench, an encounter that changed the way I saw myself, my past, and the quiet corners of my own heart. Before I tell you everything, I can't help but wonder where you're joining me from. I always love knowing which cities are out there listening to these stories. And if you find yourself pulled into this little journey with me, feel free to subscribe and tap that like button. It helps me feel a little less like I'm talking to myself out here. Now, let me begin. I still remember how the late summer air felt that day, thick with the scent of marigolds and freshly cut grass. My daughter had asked me to water the garden because she and her boyfriend, Ethan, had planned to drive out of town. She was 26, full of energy and plans, and that bright impatience of youth. At 60, I moved more slowly, not resigned, just seasoned. Life had taught me to choose my steps carefully. I didn't expect to find him sitting there, waiting on the old bench at the far end of the yard. That bench had seen decades, storms, birthdays, heartbreaks, and more than a few conversations I wished I could take back. It creaked even when no one sat on it, so I heard it groan before I actually saw him. He stood when he noticed me. That alone caught my attention. Young people don't always rise these days, but Ethan did, brushing dirt from his palms as though he'd been working through something in his mind. "Miss Carter," he said, giving me that soft, almost shy smile of his. "I hope you don't mind. I needed some fresh air." I told him he didn't need my permission to sit in a garden. It was my attempt at sounding casual, but inside I felt the faint stirring of something I hadn't felt in a long while, a sense of being unexpectedly seen. Not admired, not desired, but noticed. It startled me more than it should have. He looked worried, distracted, the way people look when they're holding something fragile inside themselves. I walked closer slowly, the watering can heavy in my hand. The sun filtered through the tall maple leaves, scattering little speckles of gold across his shoulders. He seemed almost placed there by the light itself. "Is everything all right?" I asked. My voice sounded older, wiser, and yet strangely hopeful. He hesitated before answering. "I just needed a moment." "And you're easy to talk to. I hope that's okay." Easy to talk to. It had been years since anyone said that to me. Somewhere between raising a daughter, losing a marriage, and rebuilding my life piece by piece, I had forgotten that I used to be someone people confided in. Someone who listened without judgment and offered warmth without needing anything in return. I set down the watering can and joined him on the bench. The planks were warm beneath me. A breeze passed, lifting a few strands of my hair, carrying the smell of basil from the small herb patch. The world felt strangely still, as though the garden itself were listening. "What's on your mind?" I asked. He let out a breath that seemed to carry a weight far beyond his 20-something years. He spoke about feeling uncertain about his future, about how much he cared for my daughter, and yet how afraid he was of disappointing her. He talked about pressures I remembered all too well. Expectations, fears, the silent battles no one notices until they lead to sleepless nights. While he spoke, something in me softened, not in a romantic way, but in a deeply human one. I saw the vulnerable boy behind the confident smile he usually wore. I saw the reflection of my own younger years, when I faced crossroads that scared me half to death. And I felt an unexpected tug of connection, like two people sitting on opposite sides of a river suddenly realizing the stones beneath their feet were part of the same path. I listened, really listened, and he noticed. "You always seem so grounded," he said quietly. "How do you do it?" I laughed gently. "I don't, not always. I've just lived long enough to know storms pass, one way or another." He nodded slowly, absorbing the words as though they meant more than I intended. There was a tenderness to the moment, not intimate in a forbidden way, but intimate in the way that happens when two souls, separated by years and circumstance, understand each other unexpectedly. Sitting there, I became acutely aware of the aging lines around my eyes, the silver strands in my hair, the scars on my heart. But for the first time in a long while, those things didn't feel like burdens. They felt like stories, stories that someone younger might actually find value in. Before either of us spoke again, a gust of wind swept through the yard, scattering petals across the grass. It felt like the world clearing its throat, reminding us that moments like this were delicate and rare. "I'm glad you sat down," he said. "So am I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. And that was the beginning of what I didn't yet know. Only that something shifted gently inside me, like a door opening in a long-closed hallway. I didn't see Ethan again for nearly a week after that afternoon on the garden bench. My daughter had been busy with work, coming and going in a rush of phone calls, keys jangling and barely touched coffee mugs. Life felt ordinary again. Quiet. Predictable. The kind of routine I used to think I wanted more of, until suddenly I found myself listening for the sound of footsteps on gravel, or the light thud of someone sitting on the old bench beneath the maple tree. It unsettled me a little, that awareness. Not in a dramatic way, just a soft stirring under the surface, like the ripple you see on a pond when a breeze whispers across it. One late afternoon, I stepped outside to collect a few tomatoes from a small patch by the fence. The sky had that deep amber glow that only shows up at the end of summer, the kind that makes everything look warmer, gentler, more forgiving. The bench looked empty from a distance, but as I approached, I noticed someone standing near it, shoulders slightly hunched, hands in pockets. It was him, and something in me reacted before my thoughts had time to catch up. Not excitement, not longing, just a strange sense of recognition, like stumbling across a familiar melody that you didn't realize you'd missed. He turned as soon as he heard my steps. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice a little unsure. "Hope I'm not intruding." "You're not," I told him, and it felt true. He looked different this time, a little more tired around the eyes, a little less guarded, the kind of tired that sits deeper than a bad night's sleep. "I was actually hoping to talk to you," he said, "if that's all right." I set the basket of tomatoes on the bench and motioned for him to sit. The wood creaked again, that loyal, familiar complaint. When I joined him, the space between us was polite but noticeably charged with unspoken tension, not inappropriate, just aware. "What's going on?" I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, and I could see the conflict moving behind his eyes. "I've been feeling off. Like I'm standing in two different lives, and I'm not sure which one fits me." He hesitated, as though gauging how much he should say. I didn't push. I just waited, the way someone once waited for me years ago, when I didn't know how to put my own confusion into words. "It's not about not caring for your daughter," he finally said. "I do. I really do. But lately I've been realizing things about myself, about what I want, about who I talk to when I'm overwhelmed, and that scares me." There it was, a delicate thread of truth, stretched tight between us. I felt my heartbeat shift, slow and steady but a little heavier than before. His meaning didn't strike me as romantic, it struck me as human. Connection comes in many shapes, and sometimes the shape surprises you. "I'm not here to replace anyone," I said quietly. "And you don't owe me anything. But if talking to me helps you sort your thoughts, you're welcome to sit here as long as you need." The air seemed to exhale with him. The tension softened. He nodded, eyes drifting toward the garden as if it held answers. "I think I've never really had someone older to talk to. Someone who's lived through more than just a few bumps and breakups." That made me smile, though there was a sadness to it too. Young people should have elders they trust. They should have anchors. Most don't. "You're not alone in feeling lost," I said. "At your age, I thought I had everything figured out. Then life taught me otherwise." He turned to me, really looking, and I felt unexpectedly exposed, not by my appearance, but by the vulnerability behind my words. It had been years since anyone had asked about my regrets, My choices, the map of my life that had led me to this bench, in this yard, talking to a young man who had no idea how many nights I'd spent wondering if I had wasted too much of myself on the wrong things. "What changed for you?" he asked softly. The question caught me, not because it was difficult, but because it was simple and sincere. I stopped trying to be the version of myself other people needed, I answered, and I started becoming the version I needed. He absorbed that slowly, nodding as though the words were settling into him like seeds. I noticed how the sunlight caught the edge of his profile, outlining the curve of his jaw, the thoughtful crease in his brow. Youth carries its own beauty, but so does the age that watches youth struggle. After a long silence, he said, "You make things feel clearer. I don't know why." "Because age has its own tenderness," I wanted to say. "Because I'm not judging you, and maybe you're not used to that. Because something in both of us recognizes the quiet loneliness the other carries." But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I placed my hand gently on the bench between us, not touching him but close enough that he knew he wasn't alone. "You'll figure out your path," I said, "and until you do, you're welcome to talk to me." He looked down at my hand, not reaching for it, but acknowledging it with a slow, grateful breath. And in that small moment, a shift happened, subtle, almost invisible, but undeniably real. Not a step toward romance, not a betrayal. Something far more complicated, a crossing of emotional boundaries neither of us had expected, yet neither of us resisted. When he finally stood to leave, he paused and said, "Thank you, really." I watched him walk away, his footsteps fading into the soft rustle of the yard, and for the first time in a long time, I felt awakened, not by desire, but by the realization that connection, at any age, can arrive without warning and reshape the quiet corners of your world. The days that followed felt strangely suspended, like the air before a storm that never quite arrives. I kept myself busy with the duties of an ordinary life, laundry, grocery lists, a phone call with an old friend who talked too long about her neighbor's cat. But beneath all of it, I felt that quiet pull toward the garden bench. Not toward Ethan himself, I told myself, but toward whatever had awakened inside me when we talked. Still, I didn't go looking for him. 60 teaches you restraint, even when your thoughts wander in directions you didn't plan. Eventually, he appeared again, not at the bench this time, but at my front door. It was early evening. A pale lavender sky, the cicadas humming in that rhythmic way that makes summer feel infinite. I heard a gentle knock, softer than my daughter's brisk tapping, and when I opened the door, there he stood, shoulders slightly slouched, a look on his face that reminded me of someone carrying a truth they weren't sure how to deliver. "Is this a bad time?" he asked. I could have said yes. I could have protected whatever boundary I was still trying to define. But the truth was, I felt an odd mix of steadiness and curiosity, and it guided my voice despite myself. "No," I said. "Come in." He stepped inside carefully, almost reverently, as though my home weren't just walls and furniture, but something fragile he didn't want to disturb. He looked around, his eyes drifting to the framed photographs. My daughter at 6 holding a melted ice cream cone, me at 40 with a smile that still held confidence I didn't realize I'd lost, and the single picture of my parents I had kept after they passed. "This place feels peaceful," he said, "like it has its own heartbeat." I laughed softly. "It creaks more than it breathes." "It suits you," he said, and there was something gentle in the way he said it. Not flirtation, recognition. We settled in the living room, him sitting forward on the edge of the couch, me settling into my worn armchair like I always did. A familiar arrangement for an unfamiliar situation. After a moment, he spoke. "My parents were arguing again," he said. "I didn't want to sit in my apartment with all that echoing in my head, and I didn't know where else to go." The honesty of that admission settled over us like a heavy shawl. I felt it pull at me, tugging at instincts I hadn't used since my daughter was a teenager, instincts to comfort, to guide, to anchor someone who felt unsteady. "You came here," I said quietly. "Why?" He looked at his hands, studying the faint marks of his day. "Because you listen. And because when I talk to you, I don't feel judged. I feel steady." That word again, steady, as though I had become some sort of emotional compass for him. And for a brief flicker of a moment, I felt the urge to retreat, not out of discomfort, but out of fear of crossing into something too tangled, too fragile. But running from meaning had become a habit of mine, and habits don't help us grow. So instead, I asked, "What do you need from me right now?" He looked up, surprised by the directness. Then he let out a slow breath. "I don't need answers," he said. "Just presence." Presence. Such a simple thing, yet so heavy with implication. I nodded, and silence filled the room, the good kind, the kind that rests instead of suffocates. Outside, the wind brushed through the trees, making that soft whispering sound that always reminded me of my childhood porch. Life felt layered at that moment, past and present, youth and age, fear and comfort all weaving themselves together. "I hope I'm not crossing a line," he said suddenly. "We both know where the lines are," I replied, "and we're not stepping over them. We're just near them." He exhaled, almost relieved. "That's exactly how it feels." The honesty between us grew heavier, but not dangerous. More like standing in the doorway between two rooms, aware of both yet choosing neither. He asked me about my life then, not politely, not superficially, but with genuine curiosity. What I had dreamed of when I was young. What I regretted, what I still hoped for, even now. No one had asked me those things in years. People assume a 60-year-old woman has finished becoming who she is. But I hadn't, not by a long stretch. As I spoke, he listened the way people listen only when they truly want to understand. His eyes didn't stray, his focus didn't waver. And I realized how starved I had been for that simple act of attention. Not admiration, not longing, just presence, exactly what he had asked for from me. Eventually, he leaned back on the couch, relaxing for the first time since he'd arrived. "You make it easier to breathe," he said. "I don't know why that feels so important." Perhaps because he'd grown up without softness, because he rarely let himself lean on anyone, because I represented something he didn't even know he needed, a safe place to unravel. And perhaps I needed something too, someone who saw value in the pieces of me I thought had faded with age. But neither of us said any of that aloud. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. "Can I come back?" he asked quietly. The question held no romance, no seduction, just vulnerability, raw and unpolished. "Yes," I said, "when you need to talk, you can come back." He gave a small nod, a grateful smile, and stepped into the fading evening light. As the door closed behind him, I felt something unfamiliar settle over me, not excitement, not fear, but a deep awareness that life was shifting around me in ways I couldn't yet name. And though I knew the path ahead was delicate, maybe even complicated, I didn't feel the urge to run from it. The next time he came by, it wasn't evening. It wasn't a moment of crisis. It wasn't even planned. It was mid-morning on a quiet Sunday, sunlight spilling through the windows in long, gentle stripes, the kind of day that encourages a slower heartbeat. I was in the garden, trimming back the rosemary, when I heard the familiar crunch of footsteps on the gravel path. I turned, and there he was, hands tucked in his pockets, expression calm but contemplative. Not weighed down, not restless, just present. For the first time, his presence didn't surprise me. "Morning," he said, offering a small smile. "Morning," I replied, wiping my hands on my apron. He stood there for a moment, looking around as though memorizing every piece of the garden. The bench, the maple tree, the clusters of lavender leaning toward the sun. Then he looked at me, really looked, as though trying to understand something that had taken him weeks to put into words. "I told my parents I needed space," he said, "and I told your daughter I needed time to figure out who I am before I drag anyone else into my confusion." A pause settled between us, not sharp, not painful, just the kind of quiet that follows truth. "She took it better than I expected," he added softly. "She said she'd wondered if something was weighing on me. She was kind, more kind than I deserved." I nodded, feeling a pang of pride for my daughter's steadiness. She had always been stronger than she knew. "And you?" I asked. "How do you feel?" He exhaled deeply, the breath of someone who had finally stopped running. Lighter, scared, but lighter. We walked toward the bench together without speaking, as though the garden itself nudged us into that familiar space. The maple leaves trembled overhead, sending soft speckles of light across the wood. When we sat, he didn't lean forward anxiously like before. He settled back, relaxed, shoulders no longer tight with unspoken worry. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, "about why I kept coming here, why talking to you felt so different." I felt a slow warmth rise in my chest, not from flattery, from recognition, from the delicate understanding that something meaningful had taken shape between us, quietly, carefully, without crossing the lines we had both respected. "You gave me something I didn't realize I needed," he continued, "a place to breathe, a place to be honest without feeling judged. You reminded me that I'm allowed to grow, even if it means admitting I'm lost." His voice trembled slightly on that last word. I rested my hand on the bench again, the same gesture as before, steady and open without expectation. "And you reminded me," I said, "that even at 60, there are still parts of myself worth tending, parts that can wake up again." He looked at me with an expression I didn't quite know how to name, not desire, not confusion, but gratitude so deep it felt almost sacred. A bond built on trust, not tension, on honesty, not longing. "I don't want you to think," he said slowly, "that I came here looking for something inappropriate. I never did." "I never thought that," I assured him. "We both came here for something human." He nodded, the relief evident in the softening of his features. "I used to think connection had to come from people my own age," he said, "but maybe connection comes from truth, not time." For a moment, we simply listened to the garden around us, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the soft hum of life continuing. "I'm going to take some time for myself," he said. "Figure out who I am without leaning on anyone too heavily. But I want you to know, meeting you changed something in me. In a good way." I felt the words settle deep inside me, joining the quiet collection of moments that shape a life. Moments of choice, of courage, of unexpected clarity. "You'll be all right," I told him. "You're already becoming someone steadier." "And you?" he asked gently. "Will you be all right too?" I smiled, feeling the truth of it down to my bones. "I already am." We sat for a few more minutes, not speaking, letting the peacefulness wash over us. Then he stood, giving me one last grateful look. "I'll come by to say hello now and then," he said, "but I think the hard part of my journey, I need to walk that on my own." "That's how it should be," I replied. He walked away slowly, shoulders no longer burdened, steps no longer uncertain. I watched him until he disappeared down the path, swallowed gently by the morning light. And when I turned back to the garden, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. Not because he had left, but because he had arrived in my life long enough to remind me of something important. Connection doesn't always lead to romance. Sometimes it leads to rediscovery. Sometimes it leads to healing. Sometimes it simply leads you back to yourself. I picked up the shears again, trimming away what had grown too wild. In the distance, the wind moved through the trees like a whispered blessing. Life, I realized, still had room to surprise me, and for the first time in a long while, I welcomed whatever might come next.